we have a terrific panel with us here today. And they are basically, this is a panel that is going to be a panel of women academic founders and their executive partners who help launch their companies. They're going to be sharing insights about working together from fundraising to daily operations and how they built their teams. So please do get those votes in for the People's Choice Awards. And in the meantime, we'll start off our panel, and we're going to hopefully highlight each of our panelists here. So I'm going to welcome each one of them. I'd like them to each introduce themselves, including when your technology commercialization journey began and where you are now with respect to those with your startup. So we'll start with Carolyn.
Great. Thanks so much, Kirsten, and thanks everyone for the chance to be here today. My name is Carolyn Nowinski-Collins. I'm the CEO of Dimension Inc. I'm joined by my colleague, Ramil, who will introduce herself in a second. We are a biomaterials company focused on developing therapeutic products that restore tissues and organs. And we are a spin out from Northwestern University. My background is as an entrepreneur a couple of times around, but also a bit as an investor, and have worked in the university system as well. So really enjoyed hearing the pitches earlier and excited to talk with you all today.
So glad to have you here, Carolyn. Ramil.
Oops. Ramil, I think you're on mute. Kirsten, can you hear her?
I cannot hear her. Yeah.
Okay.
And so, you know what? Let's move on to Katie for the moment and see if we can get her sound issues resolved. So, Katie, go ahead and introduce yourself.
I'm Katie Warner. I co-founded a company called Rabometrics, actually with my former undergraduate research mentor, a professor of chemistry at UNC called Kevin Weeks, and was later connected with Anil Goyal, who I think will be introduced shortly, who was our COO for a time, who helped us build the company. Rabometrics is a platform company. We discover drugs that target RNA. My journey started in either 2015 or 2016, depending on what you count as T = 0. I think I got a paycheck from the company in 2016, so maybe we'll say that. Now we've raised about $90 million and have about 40 people in the company.
Great, thanks, Katie. Anil.
Hi, my name is Anil Goyal. I'm CEO of another company, Invention Therapeutics. I've been in the biotech industry for about 26 years. This is my 6th company. And Katie and I will share with you our journey when we launched the company. When she launched the company, I came to assist her, to be honest. So looking forward to this discussion. I hope if you have not voted yet, you need to vote for Hassan Tech. I had the privilege of working with her on her story. So, and I've been involved in Equalize. This is my 2nd year. I blame Shobha Parthasarthi for dragging me in here. And I'm happy that I've been dragging.
We're thrilled to have you. So thanks, Anil. Ramil.
Can you hear me now? Sorry.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, good.
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry about that. So I'm Ramil Shah. I'm the co-founder and chief scientific officer of Dimension Inc. As Carolyn pointed out, as far as where Dimension Inc. is and when we started, but my background is mainly has always been in the tissue engineering biomaterial space, and excited to. I guess it was a spin out from Northwestern when I was there as a faculty, and now I'm excited to be part of Dimension Inc. to really bring our technology really to translation and commercialization.
Great. Well, and we're thrilled to have you all here, and thrilled to hear more about your stories. And Ramil and Carolyn, I'm going to start off with each of you. One of the most crucial parts of any venture is the team that's associated with it. Could you talk about your journey of how you found each other and forming a team together and how that's worked?
Yeah, I can go ahead and kick us off, and then I'll let Ramil fill in some of the gaps there too. But Ramil and I actually met several years before we joined forces. It was actually one of the board members of my previous company that made the introduction. I think he had seen Ramil give a talk at Northwestern. This is when she was faculty at Northwestern, and said, you really need to go and meet this rock star, rising star faculty member. And so I said, okay, well, you do what a board member asks you. So I sat down with Ramil and thought it was just fascinating. She was and talking about 3D printing tissues and organs. And I said, this is awesome. I was working in a different type of manufacturing, more digital manufacturing at the time. And so I said, well, I'll introduce you to some colleagues and, happy to help in the future. And then fast forward in 2019, when I was leaving my previous company and looking for what I was going to do next, I had remembered what Ramil was building, said, where are things at? And it turns out, and I'll let her pick up the story here, she had already started the company. And I was fortunate to join them after about 6 months of dating, but I'll let Ramil explain.
Yeah, I think, things happen for a reason. And so just a little bit more about background as far as how the research that I was doing at Northwestern really spun out Dimension Inc. In the 3D printing field, 3D printing being used in tissue engineering is really at its infancy in 2010 when I started as a faculty at Northwestern. And so we started using 3D printing as a tool for tissue engineering scaffolds. And my background is in material science, and one of the major limitations is really in the biomaterials that were available that were both 3D printable and also fulfill the requirements that we needed for tissue engineering different tissue targets. And so we really focused on developing these more biomaterials platform technologies that were 3D printable. And luckily, we were very successful over the years to create and really expand what we can 3D print with different biomaterial platforms. And so we got a lot of interest as we started publishing on our work, as well as giving talks at conferences, really from strategic partners and companies who are really interested in getting into the 3D printing field and in the regenerative medicine space. And so that's really was the motivation to spin out Dimension Inc. to really facilitate those interactions with strategic partnerships and really try to think about how can we translate the technology outside of the university. We did have an interim CEO during this, starting of Dimension Inc., which was founded in 2016, but really started activities in 2017. But it really, the stars aligned when we, Carolyn and I touched base over the years, and we got introduced. And then when she was trying to find what her next step was, I was trying to find a new CEO who was more a permanent CEO and who can really bring us to where we wanted to be. And so that's sort of, Carolyn, you joined when? What year was it? It seems like.
Yeah, at the end of 2019. And so
2019,
we have another co-founder, Adam, who is also partnered with us. And I think, with any team, you've got to make sure that you can all work together. And I had some previous horror stories with my first founder. And so it was really important to me to make sure the three of us could really align on what was important, and what were we building, and what was important to us as we built it.
Yeah, I think that dating analogy is incredibly apt here. Neil and Katie, do you want to talk about speak to your co-founder experiences?
Sure, maybe I can start, Neil, and then you can pick up. I mean, I mentioned that I founded Rabometrics initially with my undergraduate research mentor. I'd worked in his lab and reconnected with him, and he had these great ideas. And honestly, I should come up with a better narrative than this, but I really didn't want to do a postdoc after my PhD for reasons. And was down having a conversation with him. He said, I had this idea to start a company, and I thought the idea was great. What's the worst that could happen? And we decided to do it. And I'd say pretty quickly realized we were good at the science and really did not know how to run a company, start a company, get something off the ground, raise money, all of that. We could get grants, and grants took us a long way, but to really do an idea like Rabometrics, which is not a small idea, we knew we needed some help and some experience. And so UNC had a really great program, to help connect people like, me and Kevin with people like Anil, who let's just say knew what they were doing. And I remember just being amazed at, kind of our powers combined, because we have the science down pat, but there's so much more to starting and building a company than just the science. And I want to kind of follow up on a point that was made already. I always refer to it as when you're thinking about working with someone or forming a team or partnership, it's, if I get stuck with this person in an airport bar at like 10 p.m. in another city, how is that going to go, right? And that's, I think how when I think of that, I'm thinking about kind of a rough situation. There's lots of hard spots, rough times, annoying things that happen, and it's all easy to get along with someone when things are going great. But how is this going to work when things are harder? When you have a bad meeting with an investor, or you literally get stuck in an airport bar. Maybe Anil, if you want to follow on maybe,
So,
maybe how
yeah.
you found Rabometrics.
No, I think I'll follow on exactly where you mentioned. So our UNC Kickstart team had relationship. They had already seen me with other companies that I had helped with UNC, and I got a call from the tech transfer office saying, come look at Ribometrics. And I came and met with Katie and the other founder, Kevin Weeks. And I said, whoa, you've been around for too long. You'll need some real help. And they had also gone through a CEO exchange, similar to what you mentioned. And it had nothing to do with bad CEO. It has just to do with strategy. And my goal was I wanted to be on the therapeutics side. I listened to what Katie and Kevin talked about, the therapeutics potential, and we really sat down and talked about it. And then we had to really think about VC. And my job was really to develop that story and really develop the team externally. I think Katie already mentioned, so she was an undergrad in the founder's lab. And that already creates a distance between how an undergrad student would be treated in an external environment. And I sat down with Katie and Kevin and said, we need to sort of not have this structure where Katie doesn't talk. Katie has to speak. She is the scientist that is running this. So it was a relationship that really built, as Katie said, trust, that Grace trusted me in that decision of we're going to have an equal play in the rooms when we go to VC. So Kevin is not the only person who's going to talk, and Kevin was very receptive. He understood what that meant. So that's the relationship that helped us really take the story out and get the funding that Ribometrics did in the beginning. So is the relationship, founders have to all understand we're all in the same boat. And when it changes is when it actually starts to fall apart quite a bit.
Yeah. Well, and so because Equalize is focused on academic women entrepreneurs, I'd like to ask Katie and Ramil, as founders who started your ventures while you were still in academia, what was it like to transition from academia to startup in life? And can you just give some pointers to people about, things that surprised you, what would have been helpful for you to know, things like that? Katie, let's start with you this time.
Sure. One maybe side note is, remember, I was leaving from grad school, so not from a faculty position. So maybe the transition was different for me. Overall, it's one of the best decisions I ever made. It's awesome. And as I've thought about that over the years, I've tried to clarify that a bit. And what I've landed on is I really love the collaborative part. And Neil alluded to this. You're all in it together. I remember from my admittedly short time in academia, there were collaborations, but they weren't really always equal. You weren't really on the same team. It was what helps my lab and what helps your lab, but not really us together. Those were harder to find. But at least my experience at Ribo is, we're all in it together. You might be on that project, or you might be the one raising money, or you might be the one doing the accounting, but we are all trying to make this whole thing succeed. And I just love that dynamic. It's an amazing place to thrive, I think. One thing that, the transition wasn't hard for me, but I've seen it for other people coming out of academia, is coming with that. You really have to be aware of what you're good at, and then let other people who are good at something go do it. For Anil, he knows how to raise money, so he should take the lead on that. And that's fine, right? You have some specialization. You don't have to know everything. You really shouldn't know everything. You should have someone who knows stuff. But it does not have to be you. And I've seen people from academia kind of go through that transition. It can be hard.
Yeah, Ramil.
I would echo Katie's remarks. I think one of the biggest things, especially from faculty to a startup, is that in a faculty position, you're the boss really, and you have your grad students and postdocs, and you sort of are living in sort of a silo where you dictate what research you're doing. But in a startup, it doesn't work unless you have the right team around you and the right types of people who can actually leverage each other's strengths in order to accomplish goals. And you definitely can't do it yourself. And I've come to appreciate that the most as we started, and also now as we're growing the team and having more and more successes. We need a bigger team. Sorry about that. So I think it's a juggle. I think as a female with kids, as you saw, it is also a period of time where there's an adjustment as far as your time commitments, where you focus your time. And I personally decided that I actually loved the startup world because I didn't know much of it. And so these past, few years, or I guess 4 or 5 years, it's really been a huge learning experience for me. And a lot of the skill sets that I didn't know I had within me had come out in these past years, and that were never leveraged actually in academia. And so I think, and that's what makes it exciting for me. I really feel like I'm contributing to the whole team, and that my contribution is worth something, right? And so I think that's what makes it fun, and that's why it was an easy transition once we got the right team together with Carolyn's leadership too. I keep on learning so much from her every day, even today. I've learned not just on the business side of things and fundraising and strategic stuff, but also how to build a culture and how important it is to build a culture within your team, because it's huge, right? And so I love it that she does focus on those things, because it's going to pay off in the long run.
And you just led right into my next question, Ramil, which is terrific, which is, because I love hearing about the fact that, you all have your expertise in the area that you're experienced in. Ramil, you talked about the fact that, you discover certain skills that you have, and maybe you weren't using those, in your previous position, but then you learn from each other as well, through this experience. And so I'd love for each of you to talk about what you've learned from each other. And Neil, maybe we could start with you on this particular question.
I think I think what I've learned from everything is you have to close your eyes and listen, and then not react based on who it is saying it, where they're saying from. I think I learned, as we are saying, we learn. So for me, what I've learned is really you have to listen, and every success you have to listen, every failure you have to listen. And so that's my, one word is just close your eyes and listen, is how I see it.
That's great advice, Neil. Carolyn, what have you learned from Ramil or otherwise in your experience with dealing with academic startups?
Yeah, I like what Ramil said. I mean, I think we all feed off each other, and that has been, we've all learned so much from each other. But I think, in any company that is coming out of academia roots and coming out of a research lab, there is this, tension's not the right word, but there's this balance that has to be struck between the research side and the company and the business and the product we have to create. And I think when our team, we've learned to really appreciate from each other, like when things need to be really science driven and when things need to be really business driven, and figuring out that right balance. And so as Ramil and I are actively every day wrestling through our planning around various projects and how that's going to work, and sometimes recognizing from Ramil, like, I need to slow down because science isn't going to go any faster than it's going to go, and I need to be patient. At the same time, I think hopefully she also learns from me kind of what it means to build value outside of just what does the data tell us, but what are kind of the bigger picture items related to building business value that come out of those same programs.
Great. Katie, did you have something you wanted to?
I guess I can add maybe a couple things, maybe a slightly different direction of, I think I learned how much I don't know. I mean, at the time jumping in, you've been an academic and like everything in the world about this tiny sliver, like you could literally be the world's expert on this thing. For me, it was the structure of RNA. It was really, I knew everything about it. But then I think had I know how much I didn't know, I might've been more scared of this whole thing. So maybe that naivety helped, like truly, right? If you think about how hard it is, in my case, to get a drug in the clinic, like that's insane. Don't add up the numbers, it's hard. But I think if you do that in little bits, like along the path, it's more manageable. But maybe one thing I learned from Anil specifically that I don't think you ever said, but I learned it by watching you was, Anil led our first fundraising round, right? To raise this seed that really got us off the ground. And something that I learned from you that it's so obvious to say, it's almost embarrassing to say now, is that I learned not to view these venture capitalists as adversaries. There was a sense, you'd go in, you'd do a pitch and they'd say no, and you'd be like, kind of mad at them and everything. But I realized along the way, when we got some traction, they were going to be on our side if this worked out. They were going to be on my board. They were, even before that point, trying to figure out how to, once they got on board with our idea, trying to pitch our company to the other folks inside their firm. Like once I changed that view on like these, it's not us versus them. That really just changed how I viewed building and, especially raising money for a company. And I really just learned that by watching you, Anil.
Thank you for saying that. But it should be a fight when it comes to numbers. That's all.
Oh yeah, no, the valuation and all that stuff. Absolutely. It's just that initial reeling them in process.
Yeah, absolutely. Very true. Very true.
I think one other thing I'd like to add that I'm still trying to learn to be better, that Carolyn is great at, is you're used to the scientific story and the explaining it on a more scientific level, and in conferences is very different than how you pitch, and trying to translate that to something that's more people can grasp, the VCs can grasp, the lay person can grasp, is what Carolyn has been so great about. Like I would explain a specific all these the data and try to explain the significance, and she says it in a way where it sort of makes more sense, and also in the context of it, as she was saying, the business story and the business case, really putting it in context. And I think it's been great just to have that experience and back and forth, making sure it's still accurate, but is understandable. So I think that's another thing. And then also one other thing is I think at least Dimensionix, we're pretty small. I think a lot of the things, one of the things that is very important in my transition into a role at Dimensionix is the support that people give to each other when things are not going the right way. I think Carolyn has that way of realizing it. If we need help, she tries to find help. And so I think, as I also am working with people who are project engineers, when I try to be more sort of aware of when people need help, and I think that's really important when it comes to the team and being able to accomplish goals.
Absolutely. Yeah, good. Very good point. So we're going to wrap up here in 5 minutes. A favorite question of mine, what do you know now about forming a team that you wish you had known prior to starting your first entrepreneurial venture? And Carolyn, we'll start with you on this one.
Sure. Although I think some pieces of this have already been said. Katie mentioned this earlier, and that building a team, I always think about as putting a puzzle together, and it's figuring out where you're good and where you're not, and then finding others to fill those gaps. And I think, as I was a young entrepreneur, I felt like a CEO, I needed to know everything. And now what I realize is, no, as a CEO, I just need to know who are the right people who are going to know what needs to get done. And I need to put those pieces together. And so, that's been a learning and growth experience for me as a CEO, but I think just as an entrepreneur generally, and thinking about what's that right way to get the right people in the right seats at the right time, wearing the right hats, and to be patient with it as well.
Absolutely. Anil.
So I'm going to say two things. Unfortunately, there are many, but I'll just say two. I think the first one is got to find somebody at the startup level that can do everything. They are not willing to say no to different aspects of the life, because you got to, do the copier, coffee machine. You got to do the PowerPoint and the Excel. So somebody who's willing to do everything is what's needed in the biotech. But the other thing is I've learned is, if you have a sense that somebody's not going to work out, fire them sooner than waiting to do that later. And sometimes all of us who really have that keen sixth sense actually can sense that way early. And that's one of the things that I think we should all sort of cut the limb off as fast as you can before it toxifies the rest of the world.
Ramil.
Yeah, I think what I know now, I think knowing each other's strengths from the very beginning, and where there are gaps, and and it's all sort of reliant on what you have to, your milestones for the year or 3 years or 5 years, and really trying to understand that, I think is important, because or else you're just trying to I think I underestimate how many people are needed to actually accomplish those milestones. And so being able to understand clearly what the milestones are and what it takes to actually accomplish those, and then fill it in with the talent that is necessary to accomplish those, I think it's important to do at the very beginning.
And I think I'm just going to comment really quickly here, your point about knowing each other's strengths, like part of that is just having the conversation, like, actually, here's what I think I'm good at. Here's what I'm observing you are. But then it's also observing that. It is saying, okay, I've seen this actually, and they do this really well. Okay, so maybe I can learn from that, but also maybe I let them handle that. And so there's many ways to learn about those strengths, but some of it's just direct learning and conversing about it sometimes. So Katie.
I just want to say first, I agree so much with everything that's been said. And I really love that puzzle piece analogy because it's exactly right. I think something that helps too is maybe a bit of a play on what's been said, but being very aware, at least with yourself, or honest with yourself about what your weaknesses are. And that's okay, really okay, right? As long as you have somebody else in that team who kind of fits with your puzzle piece and can do that part or help you get better at that part and so on. Although I do think across the board, resilience is the number one thing I'd look for, besides the airport bar analogy. You got to be able to fail with the person. But after that, I'd take somebody who can, you can kind of fail with or stumble with or pick yourself up off, when you're from your puddle with, because there's just going to be hard times, even if you don't know exactly what they are. And if you can kind of work through that together, it's going to go a lot better.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So the final question I have for each of you is here we are with all these terrific people, this audience who's come here today to support women academic entrepreneurs. What advice do you have for women academic entrepreneurs and anyone who's kind of, in similar stages in their innovation journey, often just starting this out? So what piece of advice do you have for them? Let's see, Ramil, can I start with you for this one?
I think always having a passion for what you're doing, because if you're not passionate about what you're doing, it's not worth doing it. I think that's what drives me and what gets me through those tough times. And so if you don't have that, you got to rethink going into this arena, or at least the startup world.
Absolutely. Yeah. Katie?
Find good support, and it might be easier than you think. I remember being pleasantly surprised how, at the beginning, it seems like just maybe you and your co-founder, how can anyone else care about this as much as you do? How are we ever going to get other people on board? But once you find those right people and you can build up your team, you don't have to do it all on your own, right? I know we've kind of said that in a lot of different ways here, but don't be afraid to reach out to other people, whether it's informal advice or actually considering taking someone new on board.
That's great advice. Yeah. All right. Anil.
So I will say first is really aim high. Chris Garabedian said several times today, we're asking for less money, right? So why is that? I think we're not aiming high. So we need to aim high and then be modest or humble in how we get there. And that humbleness comes from just exploiting your core strength, whether it's scientific, analytical, people, but aim high is what I would say to all of us. And I try to do that every day still. But if you don't aim high, you're not going to achieve it, right? That's the sports analogy. You've got to put the bar very, very high. So that's my advice to folks. Don't be afraid to aim high. So.
Terrific. Love it. Carolyn.
I really love what everyone's just said. And I think, as women entrepreneurs don't always aim high enough, I think. And I think this may be just our tendency. And so my piece of advice is going to seem kind of contradictory to that, because I think that is really important. But at the same time, I will say, don't be afraid to be vulnerable. And I think some of this goes to what Katie said. When you ask for help and you ask for advice and you ask to hear people's stories, one of the best things that I learned is asking people to tell me their story about their company, about the hardest thing they've gone through, how they overcome that challenge, how did they think about hiring this? Do you hire this person before that person? Do you do this milestone before that milestone? Just being able to be vulnerable and ask those questions that might seem awkward to ask, like, why is this person going to tell me this? But yet at the same time, you learn so much, and being able to then take those learnings back to your company as you build it, I think will be invaluable.
Right. I totally agree. I mean, and you all being here today and spending this last half an hour with us and sharing your experience and your learnings, I think is just probably been invaluable to all of us. But another terrific way to honestly cap off this 6 months journey that our pitchers, our mentors have had with this. So thank you all so much for being a part of this today and for sharing your experiences.